I was standing in the doorway of what used to be my room when I heard my mother's voice float up the stairs, warm and indulgent in a way it never was with me. "Of course, sweetheart, the desk is perfect for you now. Amelia barely uses it anyway." The words didn't surprise me. Nothing they did surprised me anymore. But my hand still tightened around the acceptance letter I was holding, the one I'd stayed up 3 nights perfecting the essay for, the one that represented 4 years of silent, desperate work. My desk, the one my grandmother had given me before she died, the only person who'd ever looked at me and seen something worth nurturing. The mahogany surface still bore the faint indentations from where I'd pressed too hard with my pencil during late-night study sessions. The brass lamp I'd saved 2 months of allowance to buy, still sitting in the corner of my room. "Sophie needs it more," my father added, his tone final. "She's taking advanced courses this year. You understand, don't you, Amelia?" I did understand. I understood that Sophie, my younger sister by 2 years, had always needed more attention, more resources, more love. She was vibrant where I was quiet, charming where I was awkward, effortlessly brilliant where I had to claw for every grade. When she smiled, rooms lit up. When I smiled, no one noticed. I walked into my room and watched as my father and brother lifted my desk, the one I'd spent countless hours at, working through calculus problems and literature essays, while the rest of the family laughed downstairs. Sophie stood in the hallway, her face apologetic, but not apologetic enough to refuse. "Thanks, Mel," she said, using the nickname that sounded sweet from anyone else but felt like dismissal from her. "I'll take good care of it." I nodded, because that's what I always did. I nodded and stepped aside and made myself smaller so everyone else could expand. The desk disappeared into Sophie's room, which was twice the size of mine and painted in her favourite shade of lavender. My room would now hold a folding table from the garage, metal and cold and unstable. That night, I worked on my scholarship application at that folding table. The lamp I'd bought had been taken too, something about Sophie's room having better lighting for her art projects. I used my phone's flashlight instead, the glare harsh and unforgiving, and finished my essay about perseverance. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 months later, I received my acceptance to Hawthorne University, 2 states away with a full scholarship. I told them at dinner, my voice careful and measured. "That's wonderful," my mother said, but her eyes were on Sophie, who was showing her a sketch. "Make sure you call us when you get settled." My father nodded absently. "Do you need help moving?" "I'll manage," I said, and I did. I always managed. At Hawthorne, I studied until my eyes burned. I worked 2 part-time jobs to cover what the scholarship didn't, made no friends because I had no time for them, and because some part of me had forgotten how to let people in. But I learned. I learned about corporate law and intellectual property, about negotiation and power dynamics, about how to speak and be heard. During my junior year, I met him, Daniel. He was a graduate student in architecture, tall and thoughtful, with hands that moved gracefully when he explained his designs. He noticed me in the library at 2 a.m, both of us fueled by coffee and ambition, and he smiled at me like I was someone worth knowing. "You're always here," he said, setting his books down across from me. "So are you," I replied. "Then we're both either very dedicated or very foolish." Maybe both. We became something. Not quite together, but not quite apart. He would bring me coffee during finals, and I would proofread his thesis proposals. He told me I was brilliant, that I was going to change the world, and I let myself believe him, because I'd never heard those words before. On quiet nights, we'd walk through campus, and he'd tell me about the buildings he wanted to design, spaces that made people feel safe and seen. "What do you want?" he asked me once. "To matter," I said, and immediately regretted the honesty. But he didn't laugh. He just took my hand and said, "You already do." I graduated summa cum laude. My family came to the ceremony, but they left early because Sophie had a dance recital. Daniel took pictures of me in my cap and gown, and that night he told me he loved me. I said it back because I'd never felt less alone. We moved to the city together. I started at a prestigious law firm, working 100-hour weeks, climbing slowly and deliberately. Daniel found work at an architecture firm, and we built a life in a small apartment with uneven floors and a view of a brick wall. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Then Sophie graduated and moved to the same city. She called crying, saying she didn't know anyone, that she was scared and alone. My mother asked if she could stay with us just until she found her footing. Of course, I said, because how could I say no? How could I be the selfish one? Sophie moved into our spare room, the one we'd been planning to convert into a home office for me. She was looking for work in marketing, she said, but weeks stretched into months. She would stay up late watching television, leaving dishes in the sink, borrowing my clothes without asking. Daniel didn't complain, but I could see the strain in the lines around his eyes. It's temporary, I told him. I know, he said, but something in his voice had shifted. I came home early one Thursday, a rare occurrence, a reward for closing a difficult case. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt wrong. I walked down the hall and stopped at the spare room. The door was cracked open, and through it I could see them. Sophie and Daniel sitting too close on her bed, his hand on her knee, her laugh too familiar. I didn't go in. I didn't scream or cry or confront them. I went to our bedroom, packed a bag, and left a note on the kitchen counter that said I was staying at a hotel for a few days to focus on a case. Then I went to the office and worked until my vision blurred. When I came back 3 days later, they were in the living room together, watching a movie with her head on his shoulder. They jumped apart when they saw me, but the guilt was written clearly on both their faces. Amelia? Daniel started. Don't, I said, so he at least had the grace to cry. Mel, I'm so sorry. It just happened. We didn't mean... Get out, I said quietly. Both of you. This is my apartment too, Daniel said, and there it was. The truth. In his mind, I was the intruder now. I went to stay with a colleague, a senior partner who'd taken an interest in mentoring me. She didn't ask questions, just gave me her guest room and space to breathe. I threw myself into work with a desperation that bordered on mania. I took every case, attended every meeting, networked until my face hurt from smiling. 3 months later, I made junior partner. I was the youngest in the firm's history. I bought a new apartment, modern and minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. I didn't put pictures on the walls. Daniel tried to call. Sophie sent messages saying she never meant to hurt me, that love was complicated, that I would understand someday. I blocked them both. My parents called once to tell me they were engaged, that I should be happy for my sister. She deserves to be happy, my mother said. So do I replied and hung up. I stopped calling home. I stopped returning messages. I existed in my work in the clean lines of legal briefs and the satisfaction of winning. I was good at what I did, better than good. I became known as the attorney who never lost, who could find angles no one else saw, who fought like she had nothing left to lose. Because I didn't. On my 30th birthday, I worked late. I always worked late. I was reviewing a contract when my phone rang, my mother's name flashing on the screen. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year. Amelia, you need to come home. Your father had a heart attack. I drove through the night, arriving at the hospital at dawn. My family was in the waiting room, my mother, my brother, Sophie, and Daniel. They were married now, I noted distantly. She wore the ring on her left hand, a simple band that caught the fluorescent light. How is he? I asked. Stable, my brother said. They think he'll be okay. My mother hugged me, and I stood stiffly in her arms. Sophie approached, hesitant. Mel, I'm glad you're here. I didn't respond. I went to my father's room and sat beside his bed, watching the monitors track his heartbeat. He woke after an hour, his eyes finding mine. "Amelia," he whispered. "I'm here." "I'm sorry," he said, and I didn't know if he meant for this or for everything. "We didn't see you." "I know," I said. He recovered slowly. I stayed for 2 weeks, working remotely, sleeping in my childhood home, where my old room had been converted into Sophie's craft studio. The folding table was long gone, replaced by shelves of paints and canvases. I worked from the kitchen table, and no one seemed to notice the parallel. The night before I was scheduled to leave, Sophie found me there, laptop open, tea growing cold beside me. "Can we talk?" she asked. "If you need to," I said without looking up. She sat across from me, her hands folded in a way that reminded me of how she used to sit when she wanted something as a child. "I know you're angry," she began. "I'm not angry," I said, and it was true. Anger required energy I no longer had for her. "I'm indifferent." "That's worse," she whispered. "Yes," I agreed. "Daniel and we're happy, but it doesn't feel right without you in our lives." I finally looked at her. She'd aged well, still beautiful, still radiant. But there were lines around her eyes now, a tightness to her mouth. "You have everything you wanted," I said. "My desk, my boyfriend, my parents' attention. What else do you need from me?" "Your forgiveness." "I don't have any to give." I left the next morning without saying goodbye. I returned to my life, my work, my empty apartment that felt more like home than any place I'd been raised in. I took on more cases, travelled for work, built a reputation that preceded me. People started calling me the Ice Queen, but I didn't mind. Ice was strong, ice didn't break. 2 years passed. I made senior partner. I bought a house in the suburbs with a garden I never tended. I dated occasionally, brief and meaningless connections that never went deeper than dinner and conversation. I was fine. I was successful. I was completely, utterly alone. It was a Tuesday when the headache started. I ignored it, pushing through a deposition, then a client meeting, then an evening of document review. By the time I got home, my vision was spotted, and the pain had spread to my chest. I thought about calling someone but couldn't think of who. I made it to my bed before everything went dark. The pain was absolute. Not just physical, but existential. A tearing apart of everything I was. I felt my heart stutter. Felt the moment it gave up. Felt my lungs refuse one last breath. And then, nothing. A void so complete it erased even the memory of light. But in that void, there was a voice. My voice, but younger, smaller. "Not like this," I heard myself say. "Let me do it differently." The darkness answered with a question I couldn't quite hear, and I responded with a truth I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there. I just wanted them to see me. Then the void contracted, compressed, and exploded into sensation. I opened my eyes to afternoon light filtering through thin curtains. I was lying in a bed I recognized, in a room I knew, staring at a ceiling I'd memorized. Years ago. My body felt small, unfamiliar, wrong. I sat up slowly and saw my reflection in the mirror across the room. I was 17 again. The acceptance letter was on my desk. My desk, still in my room, the brass lamp glowing softly in the corner. I picked up my phone and checked the date. 3 months before graduation. 3 months before everything I'd lived through would begin. I sat very still, processing the impossible. This wasn't a dream. Dreams didn't feel this real, didn't include the specific ache in my shoulders from yesterday's volleyball practice, didn't come with the smell of my mother's cooking drifting up from downstairs. I had died, and I had returned, and I had been given something I'd never dared ask for. a second chance. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the suburban street I'd grown up on. Everything was the same. Mrs. Patterson watering her garden across the street, the oak tree with the tyre swing 2 houses down, Sophie's car in the driveway, the one my parents had bought her for her 16th birthday, while I'd saved for a year to buy my own used sedan. But I was different. I carried memories that didn't belong to this timeline, knowledge of a future that hadn't happened yet. I knew how this story ended, and I knew exactly where it had gone wrong. This time, I wouldn't make myself small. Dinner that night was the same as I remembered it. My mother had made roast chicken, Sophie was talking about her day, my father was reading something on his phone, my brother was arguing about sports. I ate quietly, watching them with new eyes. "Amelia, you're quiet tonight," my mother said, almost as an afterthought. "Just thinking about school," I replied. "Still working on those applications?" my father asked without looking up. "I already got in," I said clearly, "to Hawthorne, full scholarship." That got his attention. "What? When did this happen?" "I received the letter 2 weeks ago. I told you at dinner." My mother frowned. "I don't remember that." "I know," I said and smiled. "But that's okay. I just wanted to mention that I'll be leaving right after graduation. I've already arranged housing." Sophie looked up, concerned. "That's so far away, though. Don't you want to stay local? We could go to state together." "No," I said simply. "I don't think that would be good for me." Something in my tone made them all pause, but the moment passed. We finished dinner, and I excused myself to my room. I lay on my bed and stared at my desk, at the wood grain I'd traced 1,000 times with my fingers, and made a promise to myself. This life would be mine. The next morning, Sophie knocked on my door before school. "Hey Mel, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Mom said I could have your desk when you leave for college, since you won't need it and my room has more space. Is that okay?" This was the moment, the first divergence. I looked at my sister, at her expectant face, at the casual way she assumed my agreement. "No," I said. She blinked. "What?" I said no. The desk was a gift from Grandma to me. When I leave, I'm taking it with me. "But that's ridiculous. How are you going to move a whole desk across the country?" "I'll figure it out. But it's not yours." Her expression shifted from surprise to hurt to something harder. "You're being selfish." "Maybe," I said, "but it's my desk." She left without another word, and I felt something like triumph. Small, but mine. The weeks that followed were strange. I moved through familiar days with unfamiliar confidence. I stopped apologising for taking up space. When my mother suggested I skip my award ceremony to attend Sophie's art show, I said I'd worked hard for my awards and would be attending. When my father asked me to give up my Saturday to help Sophie with her college applications, I said I had my own work to do. They were baffled. I had always been accommodating, always flexible, always willing to bend. This version of me confused them, frustrated them, but I found I didn't care about their frustration the way I once had. I graduated as valedictorian. My speech was about finding your own worth instead of seeking it in others' approval. No one in my family understood it was about them. I moved to Hawthorne at the end of summer, driving my old sedan packed with everything I owned, including my grandmother's desk, carefully wrapped in blankets. My parents helped me move in, briefly, but left before lunch because Sophie needed help preparing for her own orientation at state. "Call us when you get settled," my mother said, the exact same word she'd said in my first life. "I will," I said, knowing I probably wouldn't. I spent the first week of college finding my rhythm. Classes were easier this time, not because the material was simpler, but because I'd learned it once already. I knew which professors to connect with, which study groups to avoid, which opportunities to pursue. But more than that, I knew myself better. I wasn't frantically trying to prove my worth anymore. I simply knew I had it. I saw Daniel for the first time in the library. exactly where I'd met him before. He set his books down across from me and smiled. "You're always here," he said. "So are you," I replied, but this time I didn't return his smile. I went back to my reading. He tried again the next night and the night after that. Each time I was polite but distant. I could see his design spread across his table, recognize the grace in his hands, remember exactly how he would make me feel seen before he chose Sophie instead. On the fourth night, he asked me directly, "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" "I don't think so," I said gently, "but thank you." "Can I ask why?" I looked at him, at this man who would someday break my heart, who didn't deserve my anger because in this timeline, he'd done nothing wrong. "Because I don't think we'd be good for each other," I said. He looked confused, but nodded and didn't ask again. I felt the weight of a future that would never happen lift from my shoulders. I made different choices. I joined study groups and actually made friends. I took an art class just because it interested me, not because it would look good on applications. I went to parties occasionally and learnt to laugh without calculating the social cost. I dated briefly, casually, ending things when they stopped being fun rather than clinging to them as proof of my worth. I still worked hard, but not desperately. I still excelled, but not at the cost of everything else. And slowly, I built a life that felt like mine, not a reaction to someone else's neglect. My family called occasionally. The conversations were brief and surface level. My mother would ask about my classes, and I would give short answers. Sophie would complain about her roommate or her workload, and I would offer generic sympathy. They never asked what I wanted, what I dreamed about, what scared me. They never had. During my junior year, my mother called with an invitation. "Sophie's getting married," she said, excited, "to this wonderful man she met at State. Daniel, he's an architect. The wedding is in June. You'll come, won't you?" I was quiet for a long moment, processing. In this timeline, Sophie had met Daniel at State somehow. They'd found each other without me as the connecting point. The universe, it seemed, had its patterns. "I'll check my schedule," I said. "Amelia, it's your sister's wedding. And I have final exams and a summer internship starting. I'll let you know." I didn't go. I sent a generous gift and a card with a polite message. My mother called afterward, her voice tight with disappointment. "You hurt Sophie's feelings by not being there." "I had commitments," I said. "Family should come first." "Yes," I agreed. "It should." She didn't understand what I meant, and I didn't explain. I graduated summa cum laude again, but this time I invited my favourite professors and friends to celebrate with me. My family came to the ceremony, and this time they stayed for the whole thing because Sophie wasn't performing anywhere else. Afterward, we went to dinner, and my father made a toast. To Amelia, who has always been so independent and driven. "We're proud of you." I smiled and thanked him, but the words rang hollow. They were proud of my achievements, not of me. They never had been. After dinner, Sophie pulled me aside. "I feel like I barely know you anymore," she said. "We don't talk much," I replied, "because you're always busy. You never come home. You didn't come to my wedding." "I know." "Do you even care about us?" I looked at my sister, at the hurt in her eyes, and felt something like sympathy. In this life, she'd done nothing wrong. She'd never stolen my desk, never taken my boyfriend, never been complicit in my erasure. She was just the favoured daughter, unconscious of the cost of her favour. "I do care," I said, honestly. "But I also learned that I have to care about myself more." "That's selfish." "Yes," I said. "Sometimes it is." I moved to the city and started at a law firm, a different one than before, one where I'd built connections during internships. I rented an apartment with a friend from law school, splitting a space with good light and high ceilings. I worked hard but left at reasonable hours. I built a life that included work but wasn't defined by it. Years passed. I made partner at 32, not the youngest, but still impressive. I bought my own house, this time a renovated townhouse near the park with a study, where my grandmother's desk sat in front of a window. I dated more seriously, had relationships that mattered, ended them when they stopped serving both people instead of clinging to them out of fear. I was happy, not ecstatically, not constantly, but genuinely. I liked my life. I liked who I'd become. Sophie had 2 children. My parents sent pictures and updates I acknowledged with brief responses. They invited me to holidays, and sometimes I went, staying for a few hours before returning to my own life. The distance between us wasn't hostile, just honest. We were related, but not close, and I'd made peace with that. On my 35th birthday, I hosted a dinner party. Friends from work, from law school, from my neighbourhood. People who knew me, who laughed at my jokes, who'd seen me cry and stayed. We ate and drank and talked late into the night. And when they left, I cleaned up the kitchen, feeling full in a way I'd never felt in my first life. My phone rang as I was loading the dishwasher. My father's name appeared on the screen. "Happy birthday, Amelia," he said when I answered. "Thank you. Your mother and I were talking, and we realised we don't know much about your life anymore. What you do for fun, if you're seeing anyone, what makes you happy." "No," I said quietly. "You don't. We'd like to change that. Would you come visit? Spend a weekend, maybe? No agenda, just family." I dried my hands on a dish towel and looked around my kitchen, at the life I'd built without their input or approval. "Maybe," I said, "but not right now. I'm happy where I am." "Are you happy?" he asked, and for the first time, he sounded like he genuinely wanted to know. "Yes," I said, "I really am." We talked for a few more minutes, surface level but not unfriendly, and when we hung up, I didn't feel angry or sad. I just felt settled. I never told anyone about my rebirth, about dying and waking 17 again. It felt like a gift too strange to share, a cosmic kindness I didn't need to explain. But sometimes, late at night, I would sit at my grandmother's desk and think about the life I didn't live. I thought about working myself to death for approval that never came. I thought about loving someone who chose my sister instead. I thought about becoming ice to survive the cold, and I felt grateful for the pain that taught me, and more grateful for the chance to choose differently. In my first life, they gave her my desk, and I studied at a folding table in the garage until I could escape to a library across the country, to office buildings where I worked until I forgot what home felt like. In this life, I kept my desk, and I studied in a place they never visited, inside my own sense of worth, in the quiet knowledge that I was enough exactly as I was, in the understanding that their failure to see me was never about my visibility. I built my life on that foundation, and it held. On a quiet Sunday morning, I made coffee and sat at my desk with the window open, city sounds drifting up from below. I had a book I wanted to read, a garden I needed to tend, a friend coming by later for lunch. Small, ordinary things that made up a life worth living. My phone buzzed with a message from Sophie, a picture of her youngest daughter sitting at a desk doing homework. "She's so studious, just like her aunt," the caption read. I smiled and sent back a heart emoji. The past was past. She was my sister, and I didn't need her to understand everything we'd been, to appreciate what we were now. I closed my phone and opened my book. And in the silence of my study, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived, I felt something I'd never felt in my first life. Peace. Not the peace of surrender or resignation, but the peace of a battle won quietly, internally, against the voice that said I had to sacrifice myself to matter. I had learned the hardest lesson, that the only person who truly needed to see me was myself. And I did, clearly, honestly, without apology. The morning stretched ahead, full of possibility and nothing I needed to prove. I sipped my coffee, turned the page, and let the silence settle around me like a blessing. This was my life, mine, built not in reaction to their neglect, but in response to my own worth. Every choice, every boundary, every moment of chosen solitude or connection, all mine. They had given her my desk, but I had found something better. A place they never visited, never knew existed, never could diminish. I had found home in myself, and no one could take that away. The desk sat beneath the window, solid and enduring, a reminder of where I'd come from and who I'd become. But it was just wood and brass now, just furniture. The real gift my grandmother had given me wasn't the desk at all. It was the understanding that I deserved a place to work, to think, to become. And when they tried to take that away, when they gave what was mine to someone they loved more, I learned the most important lesson of all. I could give it back to myself. And I did, every single day, in every choice that honoured my needs over their expectations, in every boundary that protected my peace over their comfort, in every moment I chose my own path over their approval. I studied at a place they never visited, and it made all the difference. The coffee was getting cold. I drank it anyway, savouring the bitterness and the warmth, and watched the light change across my desk. Another day, another gift, another chance to live as myself, for myself, answerable only to the woman in the mirror who finally knew her own worth. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside, I sat in stillness and satisfaction, holding space for the girl who died wanting to be seen and the woman who learned to see herself. Both of us were at peace now in this place they never visited, doing the work that mattered most, building a life that needed no witness but my own.